I'm delighted to welcome our next speaker, Kurt Gray, who's at the forefront of efforts to find common ground. He's the incoming chair in social psychology of polarization and misinformation at Ohio State University. He's author of another wonderful book, Outraged, which was just published this year. And I also recommend this, it's really wonderful. And he's going to also talk about efforts to reduce polarization. Thank you and welcome, Kurt.
Thank you for having me, everyone. See, we're good. Thanks for having me. I probably don't need to tell you that we are more divided than ever today. If you see an interaction like this, it's probably not surprising to see it, right? Not only are these folks disagreeing about politics and policy, but they have a deep sense of animosity towards each other, unfortunately. And so what I study and what we'll talk about very briefly is why we fight and get outraged and ultimately how to make it better. And you may have a pretty good sense of what drives moral conflict. You might think, well, it's because the other side is stupid. The other side is evil. But of course, no one is fundamentally, or few people are fundamentally evil or fundamentally stupid. At the end of the day, right, we're all trying our best to protect ourselves and our family. And what drives moral conflict is ultimately worries about our safety. It's being concerned about threats that are facing us. And it's feeling victimized in the world, right? Whether or not those feelings are agreed upon by others, that's how it feels to people themselves. And that's what makes them lash out in moral outrage. We get outraged because we feel threatened. And then the question is, look, if we get outraged because we feel vulnerable to harm, why do we feel so vulnerable to harm today? Aren't we incredibly safe in an incredibly overall prosperous society? Well, unfortunately, I think this goes against human nature, right? Even if we're safe today, that's not always how we were. That's not how we evolved. And one thing that I did for Outrage is dig back in the anthropological record to think about what were humans like millions of years ago, even before we were humans, right? When we were evolving. This is what it was like to be an ancient hominid, right? We were more likely to be hunted than hunters, right? We were less apex predators and more prey. And even though today we're much safer from predators, right, we still feel human predators. Folks who are out to get us, out to get our kids. The example I like to give is, imagine your kids are out playing and they're in your front lawn, and you see a white panel van drive slowly up the street and then drive slowly back down the street. You don't think, I wonder if that's a lost locksmith. You think, I wonder if someone's trying to kidnap my kids, right? That's the kind of mindset we often approach the world, are kind of like most animal feelings, right? That we need to kind of grapple with. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, we worry about protecting ourselves and the vulnerable, right? We're all motivated for protection, right? Concerns about harm, and we're not trying to burn the world down. No one is trying to burn the world down. We're all trying to protect ourselves. And when we disagree about morality, we disagree about different visions of threats. Right, so here in America, we're really concerned about the gun debate, right? And if you are against, guns and you're pro-gun control, then you're probably worried about mass shootings. But if you're pro-gun rights, you're not for mass shootings. Instead, you're for protecting your own family, right? This is how people make their moral positions based on what they see as protecting themselves. So if you want to understand the other side, you need to ask yourself, what is the other side trying to protect when it comes to harm? And look, it's easy to assume that we have different moral minds, that liberals and conservatives are somehow deeply different when it comes to their values. And it can seem like this, but if you dig a little deeper into our kind of moral cognition, our thoughts and feelings, right, we all have the same moral minds, and that's we all condemn harm, right? But the key is harm is a matter of perception. Is using marijuana, is that something that helps people relax after a long day of work? Or is it something that's tearing the family apart? Different people disagree. And we have disagreements about gay rights or immigration or guns or abortion, right? We're disagreeing about all these issues, but at the end of the day, we're all asking ourselves, who seems the most vulnerable to victimization, to harm and suffering? And based on your answer to this is where you make your moral judgments, right? So we all have the same common currency when it comes to moral judgments. We just disagree about who's most vulnerable to harm. And look, we might all agree that kids, they're vulnerable to harm. This is why everyone says, think of the children when trying to motivate kind of moral persuasion. But it gets more complicated for hot button issues. Like when it comes to abortion, should we be worried about the vulnerability of pregnant women or of fetuses, right? And based on your judgment of who's most vulnerable here for this trade-off, you come to different judgments. Same thing with something like Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, right? Each of these sides is trying to protect someone. They're just disagreeing about who's vulnerable to harm. And so if you want to understand moral divides, you need to see the harms that someone else sees. And so in my lab, we work a lot about how best to bridge divides, how to bridge these gaps. And when you ask people what would make you respect a political opponent in a conversation, they generally tell you that it's facts and evidence. That's what they want in conversations, not personal experiences, right? They want, just give me the facts. But here's the thing, do facts really help us see the harms that other people see? Is one more fact thrown at each other going to help this conversation go better? Right? We've done this in the lab. We've given people the facts that they think they want. And then they say, you know what? Those are fake facts. I want the real facts. I want the facts that support my perspective, right? And so it's not going to work because we have different media ecosystems. We believe in different facts. Instead, my work reveals that storytelling is much more powerful than facts and stats when we're trying to bridge divides. In particular, sharing your own personal experiences of harm, your feelings of vulnerability. This is what helps us understand each other, right? If you share where you're coming from because of the harms that you see and your desire to protect, that's what makes people be willing to talk and engage with you. And that's because it's rational, we understand, for people to want to avoid harm, even if we disagree with the harms we see. And so we've run these studies. We've had people have conversations, right? Really intense conversations about moral issues where they disagree. And we've given facts versus experiences in these conversations, like here's how many times guns are used in self-defense, or here's a story, right? My mom used a gun to defend herself from a home intruder, right? And when we record these conversations and we code these conversations, we find that personal experiences are almost always respected more than facts. This works on YouTube, right? Stories generate more compassion, more respect than do facts. It's crazy. It works everywhere, even in really intense conversations, national conversations about gun debates or immigration. Facts aren't as powerful as stories. Now, of course, facts still matter. I'm a scientist, right? We all believe facts matter. But at the end of the day, right, telling stories is the way to bridge divides. And of course, telling stories is challenging. But I'd like to encourage you just to try not only to tell your own stories, but to ask questions to get at other people's stories as well. It's clear that polarization isn't going away, right? But I'd like you to think about a couple key points. One, everyone wants to protect themselves and their families from harm. But harm, and therefore a moral sense, is often a matter of perception. And to best bridge divides, we need to tell stories about harm and not just throw facts at each other. To learn more, you can look at Outraged, and I've got a big online resource so you can see basically the main points of the book for free on my website. And if you want to learn more, you can just email me. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Kurt. We really appreciate your wisdom on this, and particularly the emphasis on the power of storytelling, which really aligns so well with Nova's investment in a media communications program to actually promote the value of stories.